Abraham Lincoln.
Louisiana Purchase, that's a name.
You need to really get off my balls, okay? I'm gonna kick your ass.
Also, why was Michelangelo so stinky? Ew.
Hello everyone and welcome to the very first edition of the Ultraman Files. I'll be your host today, Patrick, and yeah, it's just going to be me. This is a solo project of sorts. It's just going to be me, for right now, talking about Ultraman. This has been a long time coming. I've been wanting to do a show about tokusatsu in general for years now, and since Colt and Wenzel have been very generous to take up the main hosting duties on AYCH this month, it's given me the time to finally sit down and do a podcast about one of my favorite things in the world, tokusatsu, and in this specific interest, talking about Ultraman. Just a quick overview of what I plan to do with the Ultraman Files. Like our previous series, it's just a deep dive into this particular topic about Ultraman, one of the longest running tokusatsu series in the world, and just my particular fascination with this show and franchise. And I'm just really excited to finally be able to have this space to talk about it. And what we'll be talking about today is we'll be doing a recap of the first 4 episodes of the newest Ultraman series, Ultraman Decker. What I do plan to do with this series is not only discuss the ongoing Ultraman series, but everything that happens in the world of Ultraman. Basically, discussing the comics, discussing the news, discussing any other Ultraman series or movie that comes out, whatever kind of falls into the purview of Ultraman. I would like to discuss on this show, and I hope that you all tune in to listen, because clearly Ultraman is a very popular topic when it comes to AYCH, because not only is one of our most popular episodes, the most popular episode in AYCH history, an Ultraman episode, but currently our most popular episode this year is about Ultraman. So clearly this is a subject that appeals to a lot of people, and stateside and across the world. So this is awesome. It just really sort of shows me that this was the right time to finally sit down and do this show, and I couldn't be more excited. And as the days go by, I definitely would like to expand, talk about other tokusatsu series, and have guests on and introduce them to Ultraman in person, and then they can experience the series together. And that's definitely been talked about before, so hopefully that is something we get to in time. But for right now, I think it's a good time to really get into the meat of today's episode, which, like I said before, we'll be discussing the first 4 episodes of the newest series, Ultraman Decker. Decker actually started toward the end of July, but I think this would be a good time to catch up. None of the first 4 episodes have been released, and go over everything that's happened so far in the series. Ultraman Decker is the second part of this sort of reboot trilogy that's coming out from Ultraman, basically honoring the 25th anniversaries of the 3 original series that basically restarted Ultraman in the modern era, so to speak, because Ultraman went through a big hiatus for several years and coming back in the late 90s with Tiga, and followed by Dinah and Gaia. And this current run, Ultraman, is basically having these sort of reimagining, reboot, sequel series of those original 3. And Dinah is sort of represented with Decker in this second installment of the trilogy, with last year's series being Ultraman Trigger, the sequel, reboot, reimagining of Tiga. But also with Decker, this is something of a twofold anniversary season, because not only is it celebrating the 25th anniversary of Dyna is also celebrating the 55th anniversary of Ultra 7, one of the earliest Ultraman series, and there's going to be a lot of references not only to that classic Showa series, but also a myriad of references to like every other series that's come between, because Ultraman is a series that wears its past, its present, its future on its sleeve, just constant references. There's some really deep cuts sprinkled throughout the first 4 episodes. So why don't we get on into episode 1, which is titled Day of the Attack. Now, essentially with Decker, this takes place in the same continuity as Trigger. So it's essentially 7 years after the completion of Trigger, and so the world is at a state of peace. The scientific military organization Gut Select has sort of wound down its activities. It's definitely more of a peacekeeping organization, a scientific organization, and it hasn't been any monster attacks, so all of its military might has sort of been made obsolete for the moment. The main character of this series is Asami Kanata. He's a young man living with his grandfather, selling a local specialty rice crackers out of this family-run business. And it was essentially kind of like a spaceport town, because inside the town, there's basically the space shuttle, there's the space Federation, there's the TPU, which is essentially the more scientifically minded organization that has since replaced Gut Select in the era of peace brought on by the successful efforts of Gut Select in the Trigger series. And basically, Kanata is just like very energetic, a generous young man, possibly a bit pushy with his charity. He's very, very direct and forceful, but always very kind and helpful at the heart of it all. And he's out delivering his family's specialty, the rice crackers, where he meets like the various characters that you will come to know over the course of the series. We have AYCH, she's one of the cadets of TPU. We have Ryumon, who's sort of like the very stoic and abrasive character who will sort of set up to be sort of like this counterpart to Kanata. We have Murahoshi, who's essentially the acting principal of the TPU training school, and we have his second in command, Sawa Kaizaki. She also works as an agent and a pilot for the TPU. The typical first episode, you're setting up all the people, setting up all the players, and sort of getting a feel for the setting. Just sort of the idyllic peace is shattered when there's a sudden broadcast that these strange orb-like aliens are attacking the Mars space colony, one that opened the Trigger series, and on the eve of them about to start construction on that second Mars colony. These orbs, they start attacking and on the red planet, then they mysteriously appear on Earth, and like 5 very specific locales on Earth. They're like these large, essentially imagine their motherships to kind of look like a double peanut shell, essentially. And they're sort of dispersing these little orb aliens out, and they're sort of attacking everything, blowing everything up. And it's in the fracas that a kaiju appears for the first time in 7 years on the planet Earth. A very cool starter kaiju called Spearosaurus. Imagine you kind of like this very reptilian monster, but its forelimbs, like it has like 2 front legs that are essentially kind of like giant spiky pillars. It's a really cool design, and kind of like what you maybe expect from like a late game or like a final boss type monster. But this is really the introductory kaiju fight. It's blowing things up. It's sort of just raising Cain, and then the TPU, which is like pretty strictly a investigative and scientific organization, is forced to kind of snap to. It's like, oh, it's been almost a decade since monsters attacked. We don't really know how to react. So they try to hurriedly reinstate the weapons of the previous organization, Gut Select. That's the Nurse Dressai mothership. Basically, it kind of looks like a dragon folded up in the shape of a spaceship. And the remote pilot mechanical plane, Guts Falcon, and they're sort of sent out to fight Spearosaurus, but he unleashes this EMP essentially that disables the remotely controlled ships and they crash to the ground. And it sort of leads to this very tense moment where the orbs are like zipping around, blowing things up, abducting people, while you have Ichika and Ryumon trying to extricate people, get them away from danger. Kanata is sort of very impulsive and brash, and he runs into danger. He picks up literally like an AK or something, like a gun, and starts shooting at the orbs. But when the orbs come in, they suck him up. He gets absorbed into the alien ball, and he's sort of just floating in the ether inside this orb. And basically, his determination and will to fight and persist and try to help others is what summons Decker. What I thought was kind of different with this introduction is that usually the main character gets into danger and for whatever reason the Ultraman of the series sort of imparts his power or overshadows the main character, and it seems like we're getting this one-sided conversation between Kanata and Decker because he's reacting as if he's hearing something that the audience can't. So he's hearing Decker sort of offer up his abilities, his strength to Kanata, in which he accepts. He takes on the power of Ultraman Decker. He gets his transformation device. It's like really cool little handle, kind of shaped like the letter D. And then summons a card, has basically the default form for Ultraman Decker this season, inserts it into the device, flips the switch, and then he transforms. And he has this, this pretty fun fight with spear swords, dipping and dodging the lasers and fighting back. And then the spear swords summons more of the ball aliens, shoots them forward. Decker beats them all away. And then in just a really cool moment, he chops off the red horn on top of Spear Sword's head, and just he hits him with the finisher, the Seljan beam, and blows him up. It's a pretty big explosion for the first episode. And so Kanata and Decker, they're victorious. However, even though the kaiju has been defeated, there's still the greater threat of these spear aliens. So he takes to the sky, even though his color timer is blinking down, so that he will lose his powers. He'll turn back to human. So he flies up into the atmosphere of planet Earth, and he starts fighting off more and more of these spirit aliens, just like wave after wave. And then when he kind of gets to the apex where all these spirits are coming from, he sees another one of the motherships, and he goes to attack it, but it produces this big energy pulse, and basically all the surrounding orb aliens sort of turn to energy, and they create this pulse, blows Decker away, knocks him back down to Earth, essentially knocking him out of his ultra state. But the coalescence of all these alien energies surrounds and essentially traps the planet Earth in this barrier that no information can get in or out of. So essentially the Earth is cut off from any sort of help from the Mars colony, and they can't help, and just vice versa. That there's essentially trapped. And it's kind of interesting that the first episode ends with kind of a huge victory for the alien invasion. They succeeded. They caused a lot of bedlam, and they trapped Earth in this giant energy shell. But undeterred, Kanata decides that in order for him to do what he needs to do and help the most amount of people, he enlists in the TPU, which is currently being reinstated as Gut Select. So it's using the scientific school and training to create new cadets for the Gut Select military program to help combat aliens and kaiju attacks. So episode officially ends with Kanata joining the TPU, to the utter surprise of the two cadets he met earlier, Ichika and Ryumon. Overall, first impressions of the initial episode, I did enjoy it. It definitely a point I will say about the first few episodes. It's very straightforward. You definitely feel that Decker is a big reaction to the criticisms that Trigger has, as will sort of unfold as the first few episodes go on. All right, and moving right along to episode 2, we have another time skip. This is 1 year after the end of the first episode, basically showing Kanata's training in the TPU program. Basically, the physical endurance, the mental endurance, and just sort of him trying his best to live up to his desires and goals to help people. And in this year, Earth is still trapped within the barrier that was created by the aliens, now known officially as the Spears, and pretty directly. And basically, the Guts Select program is being reactivated to combat alien and kaiju forces. And while he's in this training, Kanata is very concerned with his family because he's kind of left his grandfather alone at the family business, and his parents are living up on the Mars colony. And since there's been no contact in or out of the planet Earth, they have no idea of what the welfare of the people living on the Mars colony or any of the people who have traveled to space or in the midst of travel in space when the Spears attack. So it's just this forlorn hope that everything's okay on the other side of the barrier. During the crescendo of the training program, what is essentially the trio of this series, Kanata, Ichika, and Ryumon, they are assigned to one last rigorous marching assignment. Basically, they're just in full gear, looking like Starship Trooper soldiers, and that go on to a 16-kilometer hike, essentially, basically just a big final exam of all their physical endurance and sort of like their scientific training. Ryumon is essentially the team leader, and he's sort of like plowing this path ahead and sort of leaving Ichika and Kanata behind, and Kanata being essentially the dead last cadet, sort of like poor scores and everything. He's trying to get Ryumon to slow up, but he's like, sorry, man, if you can't keep up, I'm going to leave you behind. I ain't got time for other people's nonsense. So he's trying to like keep up, but there's this strange earthquake that causes Kanata to trip, and he falls down the hill and essentially kind of like sprains his ankle. It's during this sort of kerfuffle, like Ryumon's like, well, call the ambulance, call the medic corps, get Kanata sent back to base. We got to go on ahead. And that sort of like triggers this big fight between Kanata and Ryumon, because Kanata's like, hey, I'm here to do my best and join the Gut Select team and like be a part of this organization that helps people. But because of his poor performance, like Ryumon's like, you can't be serious. Like you're not as dedicated as the rest of us. You're not gonna make it. So quit wasting your time. And essentially the bickering comes to a head. Ichika tries to break it up, and in the process sort of gives her reasoning for joining the Gut Select is that she has a dream to go to space, and she's very empathetic to all the people who got trapped in the process of going to space when the aliens attacked. And basically like the journey to the frontier of space is like just this big thrilling dream of humanity, and she kind of wants to be able to basically do the typical Toku goal of like protecting people and making sure that they were safe to live out their dreams. Right after all this, there's another big earthquake, and essentially the kaiju of this episode, Death Drago, this sort of bipedal serpent-like kaiju with basically like antlers, like elk antlers, moose antlers is on its head. And this kaiju being from the previous season, Ultraman Trigger, he shows up and he's wrecking everything. And because Guts is still a fledgling military force again, they're still trying to dust out the cobwebs of all their old equipment. So the Nurse Dressai has to be manually piloted, and they send off Guts Falcon, which is sort of like this AI-controlled yellow mechanical like mini mech / jet. Typically it's AI control, but due to that EMP attack, they had to resort back to manual piloting, which the president has taken upon himself to fly. And he's just like, oh yeah, I got it. But then in private, it's like, man, flying this thing sucks. It's not meant to be flown by a person. So he gets in the plane, he flies around, starts shooting up the kaiju, and his second in command, Kaizaki, sort of like giving him the rundown of what the previous Gut Select team found out in their battles with the Death Drago Kaiju in the first season with Trigger, is that if you blow off the horns, shoot them off, destroy them in some fashion, that the Kaiju will lose its will to fight. And while he is successful in shooting off one of the horns, that actually doesn't deter the Kaiju at all. So he just keeps attacking. He's just as enraged. While the Kaiju is attacking and Falcon is trying to hold it off, the trio, they sort of like snap to attention. They run back to town and sort of like try to help the civilians escape, get to safety. And it's during this sort of fracas that the Death Drago sees the trio trying to help this old man. He attacks him with his energy ray. The principal guides the Falcon to shield him from the attack, and he disengages the Falcon. And during that sort of like clatter and clamor, Kanata runs off and transforms into Decker for the first time in a year, after secretly scrolling away part of his training to be able to summon the Decker Ultraman, because that's a part of why his contemporaries didn't feel he was like giving it his all, because he was sort of devoting a portion of his time that they would be doing to like physical training or studying to like trying to summon the Ultraman again, and he just never could. But it sort of shows why he can only summon it in danger, which, that's a very common superhero trope. You can only get your powers in the most extreme mortal peril. Decker's here and he's fighting again. And he's getting the run down by the Kaiju as usual, and another desperate moment, he gets a power up, and this power up being his little capsule that holds all of his transformation cards, his power cards. It lights up, and it ejects 3 new dimension cards, and this being each one featuring one of the 3 classic capsule monsters from Ultra 7, because this, like I said earlier, is in part an anniversary season for Dyna and an anniversary season for Ultra 7. So it shows those 3 capsule monsters. Wyndham, Miklas, and Gira is in this time that Kanata chooses to summon. Miklas is sort of this large, kind of goofy looking kaiju. He has a big head, like big lips, big googly eyes and horns jumping out of him. He kind of looks like a head with like arms and legs kind of sprouting out of him with a tail. So he summons him up. They sort of both like tag team Death Drago. He does a tackle. Basically, Mikla does like a leg drop on him. Just like jumps up, just drops down right on the Kaiju's back. Sets him up for Decker's finisher. He hits him with the Speldum beam. That's the Seljan beam. Blows him up, saves the day. And then the principal, Murahoshi, he climbs out of the wreckage of the Falcon, and he sees the trio there attending to the civilians and the refugees of the Death Drago attack. And while he was sort of aggravated by their bickering earlier, he realizes that their heart's in the right place. So he decides to promote them to the official Gut Selects team, the newly reinstated Gut Selects team. Much to their late reaction, it's like, oh, wait, did we just get promoted? We're on the team. We're official now. So this is the first steps of the Gut Select to be the protective force that the world needs to fight off Kaiju. And it's at the very end of the episode we get a tease for a new character for the team, which we'll get into more detail in the 3rd episode. Which, well, as it's spelled HANE2, or as it's pronounced in so, HANA. It's just like really cute, like little pod of a robot. He has a little swivel head, little flappy ears, and he's basically the AI pilot for the Guts Falcon and the new mechanical transforming jet, the Guts Hawk, which essentially it's just the red version of Falcon, but it has like these 2 like claws that kind of switch up from underneath it. It's a pretty cool robot / jet. It's basically like the yearbook meme. It's like Falcon, the cooler Falcon, which leads us into the 3rd episode titled Move Out Gut Select. So basically this is the big show out episode for the new Gut Select team, and the episode opens with a new addition to the team, Professor Yuichiro Asakage, and basically he's the one that's been behind the scenes making all the new tech, making the Guts Hawk, rebuilding the Guts Falcon and the Nurse Dressai mothership to sort of get ready for the newly invigorated Kaiju Scourge. And basically he sort of sets out this test to see which of the trio be the one to pilot Guts Falcon, since Hane is the one that's remotely controlling the Guts Hawk. They need someone to provide backup with the Falcon. So basically the trio go to this virtual reality simulator to basically test their wherewithal as pilots, and they all fail in spectacular ways. Like Kanata just like crashes right out of the gate. Ichika ends up failing because she uses friendly fire. Basically, she tries to shoot the kaiju, ends up shooting the hawk, and then Rimon just flies directly into the kaiju's beams. So none of them are doing too hot right now. And then it cuts away to Kaizaki and Murahoshi, the lieutenant and commander, respectively, talking about basically the update, the information about the spears, because basically the sort of peanut shell like motherships that unleash this horde of spears onto the earth, they sort of dubbed them to be king spears, and they are located in 5 strategic points in the earth: New York City, America; Sorafune, Japan; Sydney, Australia; Cairo, Egypt; and Paris, France. Like big marquee Independence Day type cities. And basically it was from those 5 points that the spears were dispersed all over the globe, and basically those are the points where the king spear sort of activated the big barrier that now has consumed the earth, and sort of has locked it out from any sort of outside communication. And basically they're just sort of going over the details of what they know about that. And then we cut back to the main trio trying to decipher the test. It's like, oh, this is really hard, and Kanata has the idea after it being inspired by Ichika. It's like, what if we could just talk to Hane and just figure out what he wants? And like, what's he like? I mean, he seems like a pretty affable AI. I'm sure we can reach out to him. So they try to like open up with like casual conversations. Oh, this is what I did when I was a kid, or this is what this is where I came from. And he just sort of very bluntly replies back. It's like, oh, I already knew everything about you. I read your files. And then they try to like tease out some information from Ryumon, who's like, he's the stoic, reserved jerk type. And so he's like, he sort of like very shyly admits that the reason why he wanted to join the TPU and to an extension to Gut Select was that he was rescued during one of the monster attacks as a young boy during the era of Trigger, and that sort of inspired him to want to join the team. So the trio, after like kind of establishing a rapport, so to speak, with Hane, they continue their virtual training. That is until the kaiju attack of the episode, which a classic Ultraman kaiju, Gamora, shows up from underneath the ground, and a really cool like little miniature set scene. Basically, it cuts to the set of a playground. Like the ground splits open. You see that the little kid like ground mounted spring rides fall into like the chasm that Gamora creates as he emerges from the earth. It's like, I would say Super Raya has been really like knocking it out of part with like their miniatures and city sets, because they're always good, but really with Trigger you saw like how detailed they could get, and they're really just continuing that wave. So like I applaud all these little great close-ups on like the miniature set, just to really see the craftsmanship of like what they can do with these like small cityscapes. So Gamora is attacking this giant reptilian kaiju, like great big horns on the side of its head, and like a little horn in its on the tip of its snout. Very famous kaiju villain. And so Ichika and Ryumon, they're deployed on foot to attack Gamora. Hawks and Falcon are deployed to attack by air. Kanata was chosen to be the pilot for Falcon. So they're this multi-pronged attack with the Nurse Dressai mothership supplying backup as well. And you're sort of given like this cool like lock and load moment, like very Starship Troopers, very that of them like just like putting like locking their Glocks, their sniper rifles, their assault rifles. They're just strapped to the teeth. They're ready to go. They're ready to fight some kaiju. So they hit the streets and start attacking, and then they actually managed to do quite a bit of damage to Gamora just from the ships attacking, like Guts, Falcon, and Hawk. They're like strafing around, they're shooting, they're firing their lasers, their guns, and they actually attack one of Gamora's weak points, its tail, and it shoots off its tail, goes flying in the air, and like a very Monster Hunter fashion, save the tail, you can turn it into a weapon later, so it's just there in the air. It's during this moment that Gamora has sort of been pushed back by the efforts of the Gut Select, that the spears reappear, and they sort of appear out of the barrier in the sky. They start to swarm around Gamora, and he essentially a pile on him, kind of like, would you say, like antibodies attacking like a foreign virus in a body, and just sort of like absorb into Gamora's hide and its carapace, and essentially transform him into a new version of himself, which is just simply known as Spear Gamora. And he has like more like skeletal, like white protrusions on his body, and he's essentially like this big power up for Gamora. So Gamora comes out swinging, fights again, and it's kind of strange that the kaiju are always seen as like a separate entity. A lot of times they're portrayed as like intentionally malicious monsters. Sometimes they're just like a wild animal, and they kind of have to be stopped. And you kind of get this impression that with Gamora, that when the spears are absorbed into its body, that it didn't know what was happening. So it's like this weird, like painful transformation, and like the spears are then controlling Gamora and using that for their own ends. And so at this point, Kanata realizes that the Gut Select machines and weapons are not going to be enough to fight Gamora, because it's just more durable, more powerful, and it's kind of beyond what their capabilities are right now. So in this moment of privacy that is given to them unintentionally by Gamora, when he releases this like EMP wave that disengages the communication systems and like the greater functionality of their weapons and vehicles, that is like, hey, Hane, I have something that I want to do. I need to keep it secret. He asked him, can you pilot both Hawk and Falcon while I do my next plan? And Hane says he can. He just doesn't know what Kanata has in store. So Kanata's like, what I'm about to do, I'm going to need you to keep secret. And so it's in that moment that Hane assumes control of Falcon from Kanata, and Kanata summons his transformation device and becomes Decker and appears to fight Gamora. And so he goes into battle with Gamora, and as strong as he is in his base form, which is called Ultraman Decker Flash type, it doesn't have the strength necessary to adequately fight. And so it's in this moment that Decker gets his next power up, which is this red card. Essentially will be sort of like his strength boosting form for this series. Pretty straightforwardly named Ultraman Decker Strong Type. It basically this red version of Ultraman Decker with like golden accoutrements, like almost like brass knuckles, like fixtures on his hands. So he's just like engulfed in flames, just invigorated with this newfound strength, he starts walloping on Gamora, punching back the beams. And there's this really cool POV shot throughout the fight, which is essentially Gamora's point of view, like first-person point of view, with Ultraman Decker in his new power form, just like wailing on him, punching him, and kicking him. And like a great bit where Gamora turns around to swing his tail at Decker, but Decker catches it and just starts swinging him around, just like Claudio Castagnoli doing the giant swing, just slings him round and around and around. And then while he's sort of having incapacitated, the Nurse Dressai mothership fires their big weapon, the Nurse Cannon, this just giant laser beam, blasts Gamora as it's trying to charge up its attack, which gives Decker the opportunity to activate his finishing move, like this big flaming uppercut, punches Gamora into the air with this huge like skyward explosion that engulfs the sky in flames, blows up Gamora, and they save the day. And they all meet back up at the mothership, and it's essentially this quiet moment between Kanata and Hane, where he's like, "Hey, I did get to bond with you after all, because like I'm gonna need you to keep my secret about being Ultraman." So Hane and Kanata have like this rapport, like he's his confidant, he's his secret keeper. And then the rest of the team comes over, and they start chit-chatting about the mission and all of that. And it's here that Kanata comes up with a new name for Hane, like a more personable name, since they have this new found relationship. So Hane is now known as Hanejiro, and that sort of wraps up the third episode of Decker. And I would say this third episode, it was definitely a pickup from the first two. Not that I say I didn't enjoy the first two. It's just you really see this progression of, I guess, like just strength of this series, because like this one definitely had the most action so far. You definitely are seeing more with the characters. I will say it does feel a little empty on the Nurse Dressai ship after Trigger, because like there's a lot of people in that cockpit in the first series. You have like the main crew. You have Marlulu, the alien friend. You have the pilot. So we'll say the adjustment period is still getting there, because I'm so used to like having just a larger cast in the Nurse Dressai, and understandably after the ending of Trigger. And this is a rebuilding phase for Gut Select. So obviously you have to replenish those forces. And it'll take a little getting used to. But I still think just the third episode definitely improves on the first two. And it's a lot of fun action to some clever camera use in the big kaiju battle with like Gamora, like in his POV as he's being attacked by Decker. So this is definitely a fun episode. And that leads us into the final episode we'll talk about on this edition. It's episode 4, The Destructive Monster Awakens. And this episode like starts in media res. You see the main trio, Kanata, Ichika, and Ryomon, like on a mission. Essentially, there's a Bimilar attacking another classic Ultra Kaiju. It's attacking the city. The trio, they're like investigating this building, sort of make sure that there's no civilians inside. And then there's just another really cool bit where it's kind of POV as well. You see them kind of like scoping around corners, and it cuts to Kanata's POV. It has like these goggles on. It has like a heads-up display with like the vital readings of his two teammates, and sort of like just give him information while like Bimilar's attacking. But then we see like a human-sized alien Shapley attacking them while they're inside the building. And this being a bit of a cameo, a little like reference to an episode of Ultraman Orb, where a kaiju Bimilar was controlled by an alien Shapley. So a little deep cut for everybody there. And so they're fighting the Shapley. They're firing lasers back and forth. But then Kanata kind of gets a little ahead of himself, and he starts chasing the alien by himself out of the building. But he chases it out in the alley and shoots it, and defeats it. But in that moment, he realizes that he's out in the city again, and that Bambular is like looming above him. It's just like, uh-oh, the monster's about to attack. I gotta transform. So in that moment of danger, he starts to manifest his transformation device. But right as he's doing so, Ichika and Ryomon are calling after him and running after him into the street. And so he panics and sort of like dispels his transformation device. But in that distraction, he is attacked by Bambular and like destroyed. But then there's like a kind of like a hazing out of the HUD, and you realize the whole thing was actually just like this virtual reality like training simulation. And so, which I thought was a really cool way to open the show, and so instigate like the drama of the episode, is that Kanata is keeping this dual identity, which most Ultra series approach in some ways. So his teammates are like, "Why are you always running off? Why are you being reckless? Just doing this one-on-one, supposed to be a team." And so like he's trying to kind of hide his poor performance while also trying to keep his secret. So his only confidant is his robot buddy Hanejiro, and which I do think it's funny in this episode, this being the most like funny of the four so far, is that Hanejiro has like this burgeoning personality of, while he was like very blunt and direct in sort of like a mechanical way, because he's an AI, but he really starts to develop this personality of like being kind of shady, because he calls Kanata like impulsive and simplistic, like calls humanity impulsive and simplistic, and then like Kanata especially impulsive and simplistic. It's like, oh, you're just reading me right now, aren't you? And after this little embarrassing moment, they sort of put that to the side to discuss a new feature that the Guts Hawk is capable of. Essentially, he's able to combine with the Guts Falcon, creating this hybrid combination mech called the Guts Griffin. Pretty cool. Kanata has stars in his eyes, like, oh boy, a combining mech. I loved those as a kid, and he's just like trying to get someone to talk about giant robots with him, and Ryumon's like, this is silly. I'm not going to engage with this childish fantasy. And everybody's just like, come on, dude, it's like giant fighting robots and they combine. That's cool as hell. Why are you being so lame? And then it cuts away to a hot spring resort. Essentially, there is this town that's renowned for its hot springs and this like old faithful like geyser of the hot water, but due to time that source of the water has dried up, and so this team is trying to find a new vein for the hot spring. And in their excavation, they accidentally unearthed this giant blue capsule, and they're just like in a mist, and like the mayor's just like automatically spinning, well, if we can't have our hot spring, we'll just have this giant blue thing to be our claim to fame. So we start taking pictures and all this and that. But this is brought to the attention of Gut Select, so they deployed a trio. They're starting to investigate, because obviously this giant blue crystal capsule that emerges from the earth can't be good, and it won't be good. So they're like trying to suss everything out. They start talking to the mayor. They start to dive into local legends, and the arrival of this capsule coincides with this local legend from 1300 years ago. Essentially, this capsule, this crystal, fell from the sky. It buried itself in the ground, and now after all these centuries, it's sort of reactivated again. And shortly after that, the capsule turns on, and it releases this red vapor that congeals into the kaiju of the episode. Monzagar is just like this long, slender, red-like kaiju. Has a big crystal in the front of its head, and it starts immediately like just shooting fire out and burning up the city. So Hawks and Falcon are deployed to attack the kaiju, but its hide is just too dense. It's too tough to like take any damage from their conventional weapon. They named it. They said there is some alloy that can only be found in space that's like 60% harder than diamonds or some such, and it's like, sure, I'll say that's a real thing. And so while the two planes are attacking the kaiju, there's like this alien message that's being played by the capsule, and they sort of are able to decipher it, which leads to this great bit that essentially this capsule is a mail order monster from another planet that apparently this planet called Marani like sends samples out to developing worlds. It's like, oh, hey, are you jealous that another civilization is going to space instead of you? Well, now you don't have to worry about that. Just use our mail order monster, release a Manzagar. They'll just blow the civilization up for you. You don't have to worry about feeling inadequate now. So it's just this really funny like bit of like, oh, this is a serious event, but also like the idea of like a catalog monster being like shipped out for like jealous civilizations to like to wreck up their enemies' advances. It's just a great idea. Fireball shot out by the monster. It hits the Falcon. It crashes, and Kanata try to use this as his escape to get into battle. So he asks Hanejiro to kind of cover for him. So when Ichika and Ryomon are like calling in, it's like, hey, are you okay? We saw that you crashed. Hanejiro like synthesizes Kanata's voice and says like, oh yeah, I'm fine, don't worry about me, y'all be careful and get on out of here. Basically he gives Kanata like this like really thick like kind of redneck accent, or like the Japanese equivalent of a redneck accent, like a very like country bumpkin dialect, and they're just like, okay. And at this point Kanata has escaped and turned into Ultraman, and there's this great bit that he's listening to Hanejiro do this like hick impression of himself, and he's just like, he has like a great moment where he just in his ultra voice just like just like this exasperated grunt, and it's an awesome bit. It's like, is that what you think I sound like? Did I just sound like a moron to you? And Kanata's like, of course, you're just you were the bottom of your class for a reason. And he sort of like huffs and puffs and goes on to fight the monster. He realizes normal strength isn't enough, so he turns into his power form. Even with the strength of his strong type, he's still having a hard time getting through the monster. And he realizes, oh, the glowing gem on its head, that seems like is a pretty reasonable place to attack. So he goes to give it an attack, but like these metal shields pop up over the gem on its head, and he hurts his hand, and so he's trying to figure out how they can get around this. And he kind of talked to Hanejiro. It's like, doesn't the Guts Griffin have like this really powerful attack? And Hanejiro's like, it doesn't really work like that because it's untested. So kind of like throwing caution to the wind, Hanejiro finagles a way to activate the Griffin despite the Falcon's like incapacitated flight abilities. So he tells Kanata to punch the ground really hard to activate sort of the subterranean channels of like volcanic water, essentially. So it causes this secondary geyser to erupt. It pushes Falcon into the air. So basically it combines mid-flight with the Hawk, making the Guts Griffin, and he attacks so he's getting ready to attack the kaiju, and basically he's asking Kanata to sort of like give him time to charge this like big powerful laser. So Kanata goes to attack the weak spot again, the gem in the center of his head. So he attacks, the shield comes up, and so in a Three Stooges bit, he kind of like takes his hand and slaps both of his eyes. So like the monster is like wincing, it's like little like Tweety Bird sounds. And it's like just like a bit straight out of like Moe, Larry, and Curly would do. And then as he's sort of like staggered by the attack, the Griffin fires its like big, powerful super laser and blasts the kaiju, which destroys the gem in its head, and he actually defeats the kaiju. Like the finishing blow goes to, I guess, the science team. The Guts Griffin to Hanejiro. It's cool to have, like, this is the 4th episode in, and Ultraman's already kind of like sharing the victories here. Isn't uncommon, but it's still kind of refreshing to see that the other members of the team are vital to the combat whenever the kaijus come to town. Also, there's a great bit with the mayor again when Ichika and Ryomon are sort of like wrapping up things in the ground. Now that sort of Ultraman has sort of reinvigorated the volcanic water and life ways of this town. It's like restarted the hot spring, and there's just this great bit of the mayor sort of showing off all the cool pictures he's taken of Ultraman during the fight, and basically doing this bit of like, oh, we can use Ultraman as sort of like a selling point. Like he used our famous town's geysers to help save the day, and it's brought to mind like this bit of like J. Jonah Jameson is like, I want pictures of Ultraman on my desk in the morning, Parker. It was just a great bit. Episode 4 wraps up with previews for episode 5 titled Glutton in the Lake, which we see the return of another classic Ultra Kaiju, Ella King, this sort of like white, long-tailed, almost biomechanical kaiju with like spinning horns on its head, like a visor, and it's well known in some of its early series that like it will just attack, traditional monster, but also he would just like pull out like a submachine gun and start blasting away. It's a great bit, with the implication that the reason why this Ella King is attacking is that the sort of civilian of the week, this young girl, may have the child of this Ella King sort of like hidden away somewhere. And that kind of wraps up the first 4 episodes. Like I said, I'm enjoying this series so far. There's been like a sort of slow build up to the series right now. The 3rd episode will have a lot of action. The 4th episode will have even more action, and a pretty funny episode altogether. And you really feeling the creative decisions to reconcile the criticisms they got from Trigger. So I definitely feel like they're kind of parsing down on the main cast. The main character definitely kind of stands at contrast a little bit with Trigger's main character, especially like he's not having like this sort of cloyingly like cheery attitude, or having kind of like a silly catchphrase like smile smile, which even for a kid show might have been a little much. And I'll say definitely the gut select team for Decker definitely feels a little more reined in, because the characters from Trigger, while I feel like they're a little more energetic, I can kind of see how they're maybe a little too wacky, a little over the top, when you have like a pilot that goes from like very austere and kind of cold to like kind of just like perky battle woman, and you have like this sort of like super macho exercise crazed ship pilot for one of the crew members. And so like I can definitely see the kind of like parsing down the overall number of characters and kind of really showing like the professional aspects of the gut select, giving like a more overall, not serious, but I guess like a more brained in version of the scientific team. And I definitely feel like with the drones, with Falcon and the Hawk, they feel more vital to the combat whenever the kaijus attack, because I would say one of the criticisms I had of Trigger is that whenever Falcon would show up, he would kind of just like shoot a couple bullets at the kaiju and then get swatted away. It just kind of not be very useful. And we've already seen in just the first 4 episodes that the gut select team is not only helpful to the actual combat, like vital to the victory, because it was the guts teams with the drones that they're the ones that beat the kaiju in episode 4. And there's a greater emphasis on sort of the reluctant kind of like classic rivalry between Kanata and Ryomon versus Kengo and Akito's relationship in Trigger. So you can really tell that Subaraya was sort of like learning her lessons from Trigger. Not to say I didn't like Trigger, but I definitely feel like it wasn't as strong as a whole compared to Zet, because Zet was the first series in Ultraman that had this simulcast release, since Subaraya's like this big push to bring Ultraman to the States. And by and large, the general consensus of Ultraman Z is one of the best recent series, and I had a lot of fun with it. I really loved the characters, and my favorite episode of Trigger is when the team from Z comes back to hang out with the Trigger team. Like, those are that two episodes are my favorite episodes of the whole series of Trigger. It's kind of sad to say, but it just shows the strength of the Z cast and that series. And so I think Decker's off to a fun start. I'm definitely interested to see where it goes, and I hope you are too. And thank you so much for listening to the first installment of the Ultraman Files. I know it's probably a little strange to hear me talk at length by myself, but I figured this is a great opportunity for me to really spread my wings and dive into something that I'm personally very passionate about. And I know that the rest of the lads, they enjoy it, and I think this is going to be like a launching point for more tokusatsu discussion on AYCH. I definitely think at a later date we can have the rest of the gang on to talk about this, because I know just from the little bits and pieces that they've seen of Ultraman, of Kamen Rider, of Super Sentai, they have been very intrigued. They've really liked what I brought to the table, and just like, I want to share tokusatsu with my friends and with as many people as I can. I mean, I don't know that there's too many Ultraman podcasts out there. So, like, I'm happy to spread the news about Ultraman. It's one of my favorite shows. And for a fairly recent, well, I would say fairly recent in terms of a general interest, I've been a fan of tokusatsu since I was a sophomore in high school. But finally being able to have access to Ultraman like this is really unprecedented, because like, we're living in such just great time to get into Ultraman, because Subaraya has been just so direct with localization of the series, like bringing just like one series after another from the classic Showa era, and having the simulcast of these brand new series from the Reiwa era, the modern series, and just like all this just rollout of series and movies and from everything in between. So it's a super exciting time to be in Ultraman, and we'll have even more to talk about, because there is a Ultraman comic coming out later this month featuring Ultra 7. It is the third series from Marvel's collaboration with Subaraya, with Ultraman. And there's so much down the pipe for Ultraman that I'm just really excited to talk about. And I hope you all join me with each installment of the Ultraman Files, so we can talk and listen and discuss about Ultraman. And I think we're going to have a great time. So thank you all so very much for joining me today. It's been a great time. And I hope you continue with this series. You can follow us wherever podcasts are found. That's SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe. All those platforms helps us out, keeps it visible, keeps it in front of you people, and I always appreciate you when you do it. If you're listening to the episode of the week it comes out, that means back on Monday, August 1st, Colt and Wenzel released the first episode of their tenure of hosting the main show of AYCH. They're taking over that show for the month. Well, I start the Ultraman show. JoJo takes some time off, and they cover in their first edition of hosting by themselves in this larger protracted capacity the double feature of Minions, Rise of Gru, and Jordan Peele's Nope. It's a really fun episode. Go check that out. On Thursday, August 4th, Cage of Greatness had a brand new episode where they reviewed 2010 The Sorcerer's Apprentice, the Disney family action movie. Shimmy, Cannon, and our special guest Jeremy Rich, who's been on the show more recently. He's filling in for JoJo and myself over there, and all the Cage of Greatness regulars. They'll be helping out this month while we're working on the project and just taking some time off to recharge and rest. And lastly, you can follow me, Patrick, on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at John Lost His Name. Thank you all so much. We'll be talking to you very soon. Take care and trying a new sign off in a very Ultraman fashion, flying up in the clouds, departing with a hearty shoo-watch.
Nice.